Hi, as Carol said before, my name is Kajetan, and the topic of my TEDx will be why is philosophy still important in science and everyday life today. And I think the biggest problem with answering this question is how we perceive philosophy, because we tend to think about it as a group of information that we have to memorize, probably inactual and not useful anymore in the world of science and modern technologies. We also compare it in our minds to opera, I think. It's beautiful and noble, and generally it's good to know something about opera, but usually we don't have time to spend our efforts on getting into it. And that's also what I thought about philosophy before I got into it. It happened after I finished my primary school and before I started high school. So it was this weird time when you're no longer a child, but not yet a teenager. And there's lots of hopes and fears at the time. And it's pretty easy to get lost in all these emotions. And at the time, my mother gave me this book, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And before reading it, I was expecting exactly what I told you before about philosophy. I expected it to be boring, probably sexist and racist because it was written so long time ago. And when I started reading, I was amazed because despite of what I thought before, I got beautifully written thoughts of man fighting with his depression, with his fears, questioning things that seemed obvious before, like what's reality and why do we think as we do. And it fascinated me so much that I got into it. I started reading more books, and at some point I decided that I want to study philosophy academically, that I want to continue my journey at the university. And when I talked with people about my decision, there were some common and pretty reasonable questions, like how is philosophy going to change your life after you study it? How will you earn money? Why do you want to waste your life on it? Philosophers are losers. And I think by answering these questions, we can really see what is the role of philosophy today. Because what we have to start with is that philosophy is not a group of information, as any other science or the topic you may learn about in your high school. Philosophy is a way of living, a way of thinking, art of thinking. And that it was since the beginning. Bertrand Russell, one of the most influential thinkers in the 20th century, wrote in his History of Western Philosophy that the role of the first philosophers was to stop perceiving the world only by myths and poems. So what they did was they left the scheme that they seen at the beginning of their education. Those men, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, stopped believing only what they were told. They thought, these are really good poems, but maybe they are not the best way to describe and to discover what the world is like. And they started looking for the truth on their own. They started watching the water flowing. They started thinking how the fire works. And they created conclusions based on what they saw in the nature. And however these conclusions might seem really absurd to us this day, what's important and what they gave us is they created beginnings of scientific method, which explains the world today. And that leads us to the second question: why philosophy if we have science today? From research of Anaximander, Anaximenes, Thales, it went the most crucial sciences that we use today: chemistry, physics, psychology, biology. And all these branches of science explain the world very well. And I would agree on point that science made philosophy not important, if not one very crucial fact, that all of the most important scientists in the 20th century, Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, Steve Jobs, who we talk about so much this day, they all called themselves philosophers. And there must be something in it. And to understand it, we have to really get into what do we perceive as being genius. And I think the best example of being a genius that you can find in modern culture is Sherlock Holmes, character created by Arthur Conan Doyle in the 19th century, sorry. Okay. And Sherlock, in some of Doyle's novels, seems really strange to other characters and the readers. Sometimes he's doing things seeming impossible for others. Some characters even think that he is somehow a god or a superhero. But Sherlock is just as mannish, is just as human as every one of us here. What he does is he can think in a very specific way that is not common in everyday's life. He has this method called deduction. What deduction is it's a term from formal logic. And when Sherlock works on a case, he has some general knowledge about the world and about the topics around the case. Like he knows British law, he knows physics, he knows chemistry, he knows botanics. Also, he has some knowledge about some aspects of his case, because he also observes the reality. And then he connects it in the process of deduction to get the truth, to get the details that he doesn't know about the case. And this is basically what is the role of philosophy today. Because with all these sciences explaining the world, philosophy lets us connect what they achieved. And it's super useful in the most crucial aspects of science today, like quantum mechanics, like cognitive physics, cognitive science, sorry. And to be the best quantum physicist, you can't only be very good classical physicist. You also have to know some aspects of chemistry, some aspects of cognitive science, some aspects of formal logic. And only when you combine it all and create somehow a new science with your philosophy abilities, you can fully understand the discovery you're making. Eric Weiner, one of my favorite authors in the book The Socrates Express, describes it this way. Science and everything that we know today is a train. But philosophy is you deciding where do you want to get with the train we have. But I think most of us won't end as quantum physicists, I hope. But what I said is also actual to those of you who just want to have a better life and be happier. Because what philosophy does is it makes you see connections when others don't see them. And it lets you be curious about the world you're living in. When you start thinking like a philosopher, when you go through a city, you start thinking about why the trolley is rolling, what happens in the minds of people around you, and why is the sun shining. Philosophy gives you a power of being curious. And the point of my TEDx today is to show you that learning how to think is something that is not inactual or unnecessary in this world. Learning how to think makes you see more, makes you be a bit better person, makes, even if you're bored with your reality, makes you really get into it once again, and to see how excellent, how complicated, and how interesting the world is. So the point of my speech is learning how to think makes your life better. Thank you.